Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time today, and welcome to the transformative power of modern applications. My name is Paul Stafford. I am the Serverless Principal at AWS for Australia and New Zealand. Also with me is my colleague and my mate, Cameron Sinise.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Cameron Sinise, and I'm the Containers Principal at AWS for Australia and New Zealand. It's a real pleasure to be presenting to you today. Thanks, and back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Cam. As a leader in your field, you've no doubt heard the term modern applications being bandied about, usually in cahoots with other equally nebulous and mysterious terms like serverless and containers. And over the past few years, in particular, you've probably gathered a pretty good understanding about those terms and those topics and what they actually mean. Now, I can say with a fairly high level of certainty that whilst you have formulated that understanding, you've probably asked yourself one of two very important questions. Firstly, how do modern applications help me capitalize on my opportunities and mitigate my risks? And secondly, how do I adopt modern applications in a way that is beneficial and transformational for my business? I have some great news for you. You're not alone. In fact, you're in excellent company. These questions or deviations thereof is a very common area of discussion that Cam and I have with our customers. And it's led us to investigate this topic in some pretty serious depth. So what we have to talk with you today is a trend. It's a trend that we believe has been driven by the macroeconomic factors of the last 2 years or so. However, it's also a trend that we believe has some very serious upside and some very serious benefit to you, to our customers. So today is not a technical presentation. It's not even an AWS service related presentation. Today is just about the transformative power of modern applications. And if Cam and I do our job properly, we'll hopefully get you thinking about just that, as well as serverless and containers, which are elements of modern applications. So today we're going to take the concept of business transformation through modern applications 4 layers deep. Firstly, we'll discuss the current opportunity and problem facing modern business. We'll examine how modern applications enable modern businesses. We'll examine how serverless and containers as specific elements of modern applications impact your business, its transformation and its outcomes. And then finally, we'll draw the bow to its final position, and we'll talk more about the adoption of modern applications, the best practices. So we have a pretty action-packed agenda, but at a high level, you'll spend the next sort of 10 or 12 minutes with me, where we'll talk about topics 1 and 2, at which point in time, Cam will take the stage for the remainder of our time together, and he'll talk about the good stuff. He'll talk about modern application best practices and paths to adoption. So our customers have been telling us over the past 2 years that their primary pressures have come from 2 main areas. Firstly, their customers and their users are evolving. And by that, I mean they're generationally evolving. They expect an efficient and personalized digital experience, and they expect organizations to have a holistic, or at the very least, an integrated view of their needs and their relationships. Secondly, the markets are unpredictable, and organizations and their systems are expected to scale, to handle volatility, to meet market and user needs. And that includes building net new capabilities rapidly, to partner effectively, or to compete effectively, or to even create net new paths to revenue. So for many of our customers, an initial step towards modern applications is about alleviating those pressures through things such as speed to innovation, agility, reduced risk, improved operational efficiency, and cost value control. Now, by and large, everything that I've just said is actually quite elementary these days. There's nothing dramatically new in these topics. And then 2020 happened. The economic impact of the global pandemic has been vastly different to that of the GFC, for example, in that it has accelerated a burgeoning business focus or mindset that Cam and I have been calling build resilience, disrupt, and avoid disruption, in that order. Kevin Sneeder from McKinsey was one of the first to see this acceleration back in March 2020, when he said, a shock of this scale will create a discontinuous shift in the preferences and expectations of individuals as citizens, as employees, and as consumers. Institutions that reinvent themselves to make the most will disproportionately succeed. But as 2020 moved into 2021 and 2022, the true impact and scale of build resilience, disrupt, and avoid disruption has started coming to the fore. 750 million is an enormous number, regardless of the context. Recently, IDC researched the sentiment of business leaders, and they released their findings in something called the Future of Digital Innovation, which is a study of the current market conditions and its IT implications. And they found that globally, the world is going to create 750 million net new applications between 2020 and the end of 2025, which is more than all the previous 40 years of application development all added together. 750 million is an astounding number. It is an enormous number. And a logical question at this point would be, why? What's driving this behavior? So to understand modern applications' influence on this, why it's of interest and how to use it with concepts like new paths to market and customer experience and product and service evolution, we first need to dive a little bit deeper into the current day mindset of the modern business. So let's answer the second question first. What's driving this? And the answer is build resilience, disrupt, and avoid disruption is becoming a common viewpoint amongst our customers. In their study, IDC found that this is manifesting in two very important ways. Firstly, by the end of 2022, 30% of spending on IT and business services will be driven by the need to strengthen digital resilience and adapt more rapidly to future business disruptions. Secondly, by 2022, 55% of organizations will have expanded resiliency plans to future-proof their business, improving profitability, innovation rate, and cost efficiencies by more than 20% when compared to their peers. Now that's a whole bunch of words, but basically what it means is the benefit of modern applications and how it assists companies and organizations disrupt and avoid disruption is becoming well understood. So what is this new norm? What are these changed priorities of the modern business? And perhaps, unsurprisingly, based on what we've just learned, it all starts with the control of resilience and security. And then encouragingly, it becomes about business progression and business productivity. What you're looking at here is a snapshot of the current day mindset and priorities of business leaders. 75% are reviewing cost. 77% are also improving business agility, and 78% are also improving resilience. 63% and 50% are all about acquiring and retaining customers in new paths to revenue and to market. And this is where modern applications can assist that new norm, that new focus. It's through levers such as speed to innovation, agility to change, risk control, gains in efficiency, and cost value control. And these days, these levers are squarely in the hands of the development and technical teams within your businesses. Okay, let's slow it down a bit. At this point in time, you'd be entirely within your bounds to say how. In the previous slides, I've said that modern applications are all about agility and transformation and modernization and disruption and meeting your market and jargon. But how? And not just how, what problem are we actually trying to solve here? So let's talk a bit about how serverless and containers can directly impact organizational goals and transformation. If we're happy to accept the premise that technology in general is both an enabler and a disruptor, and that it progresses exponentially, then we can draw a line that looks something like this. Additionally, if we're happy to accept the premise that organizations, which may have owner or shareholder or employee responsibilities are by nature more controlled and risk aware, then we can draw a second line that looks something like this. I believe this represents one of the greatest management challenges of our current times, which is how does the modern organization, the modern business, withstand continuous and exponential disruption and at the same time capitalize on continuous and exponential enablement from the same source? Previously, organizations thought that great big sweat of the brow changes in trajectory or digital transformations were the way to go, but there's numerous problems with this. Even if you get it right and predict where the line of disruption and enablement is going to be, how long are you actually going to be transformed for? Even if you run things like this as an annual, well, you can't really run things like this as an annual project. It would be like swinging for the boundary on every ball. It would get risky and expensive. Recent-ish times has seen a plethora of non-technical innovation in the form of things like DevOps and Agile and SRE, all of which draw from or are based on the notion that small incremental pockets of prioritized evolution or innovation leads to business value and an uplifted customer experience. These actions are far more likely to help an organization transform rather than the great big resets of trajectory. Organizational priorities change. Problems become more pronounced or they recede entirely. Opportunities present themselves in small windows, so it stands to logic that we should be operating in a state that can pivot speedily, that can evolve, and that can innovate. And through no other mechanism is speed and innovation more achievable than when you marry the power of increments together with something like modern applications, underpinned by containers and serverless. So that's a big statement, and I know it's a very big statement, but it's an important statement because it gives us a forcing function. It means that we can take our question and evolve it a little bit further. And the question we should be asking ourselves at this point is, how would a modern application based on a cloud service lead me more directly to value concepts like operational efficiencies and innovation? And the answer is it comes down to reducing the cycles that your teams put into actions and tasks that are of no material benefit to your organization. And conversely, maximizing your team's efforts in the actions that can directly contribute to organizational goals and ambitions. Agility comes from not having to do anything in those bottom 4 layers. And innovation comes from having the freedom just to focus on creating business value. So, for example, 2 slides back, we learned that 63% of business leaders are principally focused on improving their customer experience. And to achieve this, they'll need several things. They'll need to evolve services and products. They'll need an enabled workforce and process. They'll need to keep ahead of up-and-coming competition. And they'll need to quickly mitigate unforeseen risks like global pandemics, and so on. They're far less likely to achieve that goal if they're asking their innovation engine, their teams, to spend its time focusing on large-scale trajectory changes rather than living in the increments and creating or reinventing products and services that directly map to business value, directly map to achieving goals, and directly map to mitigating risks. So what are the numerics behind this? What sort of outcomes should we expect from building modern applications? And importantly, how do we actually measure ourselves for success? This was studied by McKinsey Digital in an article called How CIOs Can Accelerate Digital Transformation Through Cloud Platforms. And this table is a condensation of that article. What you're looking at here is a view of the typical business outcome based on the type of computing consumption model. So on the left, we have infrastructure as a service, which evolves into platforms as a service, which can be defined as containers. And finally, functions as a service, which is serverless. And depending on your computing need, the outcomes change. For example, productivity gain goes from 10% to 40%, and time to market is quicker. However, the big discovery here, the hero metric, is that for the first time, the change-run ratio flips in favor of change. Meaning, building modern applications with containers and serverless as part of a cloud-native strategy puts companies in a position where 50 to 70% of their resources' time could be spent creating and evolving as opposed to operating and maintaining. And this is where gains in innovation around product evolution and digital strategy and meeting your customers' and users' needs can be made. So now the time has come to consider those practices and how we then put them into play. And for that, I'm going to hand over to Cam, who's going to talk with you about modern application best practices and the paths to adoption.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Cam.
Paul. Terrific. So now that we have a really good understanding on the why of modern applications, let's dive in and explore what modern applications are and where and how to get started. So what exactly are modern applications? You know, the applications that customers are building today need to scale quickly to potentially millions of users. They need to have global availability. They need to manage petabytes, if not exabytes of data, and they need to respond in milliseconds. These are modern applications. They cover use cases such as web and mobile backends, IoT applications, AI/ML workloads, microservices, and even more. With modern application architectures and tooling, customers are able to reduce development and maintenance costs and improve return on investment by building highly scalable applications, but often without increasing team members and by managing the code base more effectively at scale. When we talk about modern applications and what it is that actually constitutes a modern application, it's useful to talk in terms of the key components that are actually common across modern applications. And so from our experience in working with customers of just about every kind, we've identified 5 common characteristics that tend to define what a modern application is. So those common characteristics are, first, that the application architecture tends to implement modular microservices. The operational model has a bias toward being as serverless as possible. Software delivery implements abstraction, automation, and standardization. Management and governance leverages programmatic guardrails. And data management is both purpose-built and decoupled. In the illustration, we can see depicted on the left-hand side a more traditional and often referred to as monolithic 3-tiered web architecture. Monolithic applications are popular because they can be fast to build. However, they tend to become difficult to manage and update, particularly as the code base tends to grow. And this is mainly because each of the components of the application are very tightly coupled. And on the right-hand side, we have a representation of the same application, which has been refactored into a modern architecture using a number of smaller, independent, and loosely coupled services. When applications are built using modular, independent services, release velocity can increase because changes to any single component are much easier to make, and they have much less impact on the other components of the application. The refactored application on the right has been implemented using serverless services, and each application microservice is provisioned with its own dedicated data store. So let's dive in just a little bit deeper and take a look at the major or primary components and services that tend to comprise modern applications on AWS. And in fact, the 2 predominant technologies that are utilized in building modern applications today are the containers and serverless services. So serverless is a cloud computing and application development model that enables developers to build and run applications without provisioning servers or managing servers, or in fact, having to deal with back-end infrastructure. Serverless technologies feature automatic scaling, built-in high availability, and a pay-for-use billing model to increase agility and to help you optimize costs. Containers are a powerful way for developers to package and deploy their applications. They're lightweight and they provide a portable mechanism for deploying applications across many environments, virtually anywhere, including, of course, AWS regions, on-premises, edge locations, and even more. When you're reasoning about which particular technology to choose for your given workload, the important thing to note here is that ultimately there's no really wrong choice. In most of the important ways, both containers and serverless technologies are able to provide you with very similar benefits. All of the services themselves are fully managed by AWS, and both technologies allow you to abstract infrastructure away from your users. They provide comprehensive integration with AWS automation and deployment tooling, and both technologies support a really wide range of use cases and workloads. Serverless should typically be the foundation for any new application or for existing applications that could benefit from being re-architected to being more event-driven. And in certain situations or for certain workloads, containers are going to be a better choice. Like, for example, migrating monolithic legacy applications to the cloud, deploying complex, long-running applications, and for your hybrid deployment scenarios. We are finding over time that many customers are actually building on both containers and serverless services. And this is because it's actually common for organizations to need to address a really diverse portfolio of use cases, some that are better suited to running in containers and others using more event-driven architectures and being better suited to serverless. Contemporary modern application architectures do offer a tremendous amount of flexibility with regard to the use cases and workloads that they're able to support. So illustrated are some of the most common use cases that we see customers adopting today. And we find that automating basic IT tasks is a really common place for customers to start. Using serverless functions to validate some configuration each time EC2 instance is launched, or implementing time or schedule-based tasks as serverless functions. From there, a lot of customers tend to move on and build data processing applications, often including dynamic data pipelines that have their foundations in containers and serverless technologies. Then, as an organization's experience with modern computing starts to spread, we see multiple teams will start building microservices-based applications, often for web applications and things like mobile backends. We're also seeing more and more of our customers adopting applications that are implemented using event-driven architectures. And this is a software architecture paradigm that promotes the production, detection, consumption of, and reaction to events. Event-driven architectures are really ideal for improving agility and for moving fast. They're commonly found in modern applications that use microservices or any application that has decoupled components. With event-driven architectures, we're producing and consuming events asynchronously, and it's this asynchronous event-based communication that helps to decouple from each other the components that comprise your application. And so remember, what's really powerful here is that decoupling the services provides the ability to more easily manage, deploy, update, and scale each of the components of your application independently. So a great real-world example of a modern event-driven architecture is provided by the team from Lego. And they actually refactored what was a more traditionally architected application. The application was refactored as it had been struggling to scale and meet peak load, particularly during critical business events such as Lego's Black Friday sales. So Lego took the approach of implementing an event-driven serverless architecture. And the architecture you see here, we refer to as being a hub and spoke design, which incorporates a number of microservices which are all producing and consuming events. Because the services are effectively decoupled from each other, the application as a whole is better able to absorb spikes in traffic, and each of the services are free to scale proportionally in line with demand. So key for Lego here is that as a result of implementing this event-driven architecture, they no longer suffer outages during critical customer-facing business events. But also, due to the serverless nature of the services that the application's built on, resource usage scales up and back down in line with demand. And this makes this a really cost-effective solution for Lego. Okay, so far we've visited many aspects of modern application architectures. So let's now consider just for a moment modern development practices. And this is important because in order to realize the full potential of modern applications, it's necessary to ensure that your people and processes are also aligned, having adopted modern software development and operations practices. With modern application development practices, agile methodologies and DevOps techniques are really able to replace and streamline legacy development through both continuous integration and automated testing practices. AWS actually provides services to help you implement and manage end-to-end your modern development practice. So we provide services all the way from modeling the application and the infrastructure to source and container artifact management, build and integration tools, the ability to test and deploy to production, and then actually monitor your applications as they're running in production. Modern application development practices really are able to effectively reverse the negative symptoms of that legacy development culture. We can eliminate long release cycles by automating tedious work and delivering much faster. We can remove overhead by using consistent tooling and processes to achieve more, and certainly more than just keeping the lights on. And we can build security guardrails into software development processes and operational activities so that security is not baked in as an afterthought. So let's imagine you've shifted the development paradigm at your particular organization. You've adopted modern development practices and you're building and running applications using modern application architectures. So how do you know when you've arrived? What does good look like? And what are the indicators that your efforts are going to pay off and that the business will actually benefit? Here are some common challenges and the outcomes often experienced by our customers on their respective modernization journeys. So first of all, provisioning environments goes from days and weeks down to minutes. This means your time to market can be greatly reduced. Software deployments are no longer manual. This frees up talent to focus on other activities, and certainly you can start focusing on activities that deliver value to the business. Your security footprint follows best practices and is actually baked into the software development lifecycle. So security management is no longer ad hoc, and its management overhead tends to shrink to a large degree. Tooling becomes standardized and consistent across teams and even across business units. This minimizes complexity, leading to reduced staff onboarding and training time, and then lower and support and maintenance costs over time. And also, developers and operators have full visibility into applications that are running in production, and they're just better able to proactively contribute to their evolution. This tends to be what really good looks like. So then, how to decide where to get started? So this does, to a large degree, have a dependency on where it is that you're actually starting from. Do you have an existing application, or are you building a brand new application from scratch? So modernization paths are a simple template to help guide you on the available options whilst factoring in your unique starting point. So as a general rule, we recommend that when building new applications, customers start by heading down the serverless path and then perhaps falling back to other options if you find that you really need to. If you're already managing a portfolio of applications and workloads today, you have an opportunity to make a choice as to how you bring each one to the cloud. I recommend you primarily focus on two specific patterns as replatforming, factoring applications. Replatforming involves moving from services that you manage yourselves to fully managed cloud services, but doing so without changing the core architecture of your applications. AWS offers managed services that reduce operational overhead without the need to rewrite all of your code. Packaging and running applications in containers on the cloud is a really popular option here, requiring very little overhead for significant gain. Refactoring means re-architecting an application into a more modular, modern microservices-based design. The process of refactoring with serverless and containers technologies certainly can offer the highest rewards, but does require the most effort of the two options. Your choice is going to be impacted by many factors, including your preferences for the portability of more open source software solutions or the operational and agility benefits of more AWS native architectures. As a general rule, the more critical the application is to your organization and to your customers, the more benefits you'll realize by fully modernizing both the application architecture and your development practices. So before we end the session today, I'd like to share these really great resources with you. If you do want to dive deeper on the topic of modern applications on AWS, each of these provide a really good point from which you can jump in and get started. So the AWS Modern Applications Home is where to head if you want to build new apps using serverless and containers technologies. And then modernizing applications in the AWS cloud offers prescriptive guidance on both the assessment and modernizing of your portfolio of existing applications. Also, a quick shout out, be sure to visit Skill Builder. At skillbuilder.aws, we offer a good range of both self-based and classroom-based learning. It is the online gateway to over 600 free digital courses, hands-on labs, and certification pathways. And these cover both the containers and serverless portfolio of services, as well as modern application development, and in fact, the entirety of the AWS universe. And finally, on behalf of both Paul and myself, we'd like to extend a really big thank you for attending the session today and learning about the transformative power of modern applications. Please do take a moment to complete the survey. We really like your feedback to help us improve these sessions in the future. So please do offer your out of 5 rating